Hello, how are you today? Whew, 2020 is almost over, almost. But if you are a Christ follower, you know that just because the year changes, that doesn't mean that our lives change. Or maybe they do. Maybe in the new year we have a fresh start, a new way of doing things. Welcome to Midweek Manna. I'm Pastor Holly McKim, pastor here at Hudson United Methodist Church. You are joining us on Wednesday, December 30th, the year 2020. Yes, there's just one more day of this year. So, as we think about going into the new year, I am transitioning. I'm still talking about Paul's list in Galatians chapter 5. Paul's list, talking about fruit of the Spirit. Today I'm on the 8th fruit in that list. His list includes love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and today, gentleness. Gentleness. What do you think about when you think about gentleness? Well, in this list of fruit of the Spirit that Paul writes about in Galatians 5, verses 22 through 23, he says this to the people he's writing to. He says, if we live by the Spirit, let's follow the Spirit. Let's not become arrogant, make each other angry, or be jealous of each other. And he says, these fruit of the Spirit, there's no law against them. So we can have lots of fruit of the Spirit. Gentleness. I know, maybe some of you are going, gentleness? What? How is that a fruit of the Spirit? Well, some people might characterize gentleness as meekness. And then they might think about meekness as vulnerability. And then they'll think about vulnerability as weakness, thereby equating vulnerability and gentleness with weakness. Is that you? Well, let's dig a little bit deeper. Brene Brown, in her book, Dare to Lead, she writes, to feel vulnerable, believing that vulnerability is weakness, is believing that feeling is weakness. I'm going to read that again. To feel vulnerable, believing that vulnerability is weakness, is believing that feeling is weakness. Feeling is weakness. So what does that mean to embody the fruit of the Spirit? Gentleness. Well, here's a key. Gentleness is not without power. Is not without power. On the contrary, gentleness is a choice. We can decide to use gentleness in our own behavior and in our relationships with others. So, gentleness as a fruit of the Spirit. We can forgive others. We can show empathy. We can correct in kindness. And we can come at someone else in gentleness from a place of calm and peace. In reading the scripture, when Jesus is dealing with his disciples or with other people who need his help, most frequently, but not always, but most frequently, Jesus deals with other people with great gentleness. There's an example. It's in 3 of the 4 Gospels in the New Testament. It is the woman with a hemorrhage. She's been bleeding for 12 years. You can find this in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 9, verses 20 through 22. The Gospel of Mark in chapter 5, verses 25 through 34, and the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verses 43 through 48. Now, this story Jesus is on his way to an urgent request. Jairus is a synagogue leader, and Jairus has asked Jesus to please come and heal my daughter. His daughter is very sick. Scripture says she's dying. And the crowd has gathered, and it's a very large crowd. It's a pressing crowd. It's a difficult crowd to get through. Jesus is trying to move through the crowd to get to Jairus' house to heal his daughter. And there's this woman. She has had this issue of blood, this hemorrhage, for 12 years. And in her mind, she thinks to herself, if I can just touch the hem of his cloak, if I can just touch the hem of his robe, if I can just touch that little bit, then I will be healed. And so she so believes, and she reaches out to touch. And the scripture says that she knew immediately her bleeding stopped, and she knew she had been healed. Glorious, wonderful. But at the same time, Jesus feels the power go out of him. He feels that someone has touched his clothes, and he questions around. And the disciples say, there's so many people. How do you know that someone touched you? And this woman, just being healed, she fell at Jesus' feet. She was terrified at what he might do to her, what he might say, how he might react to her. Because in that day, she was considered unclean. She was ostracized in her community. And it would have been very wrong of her to touch Jesus, even his clothing. So what does Jesus do? In Jesus' gentleness, notice I said most frequently he deals with people in gentleness. He says to her, if she throws herself at his feet, trembling in fear, he says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering. Your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering. Her isolation had ended. Her suffering had ended. The distancing, the name calling, the shame that would have been brought on her, all of that has gone away just because her courage to reach out and touch Jesus' cloak and his gentleness in dealing with her. So what is the fruit of this fruit of gentleness? Well, let's think about that. In the fruit of the Spirit, in gentleness, you reflect the grace of God. That's exactly what Jesus did. He reflected the grace of God. You allow God's grace to flow through you. In other words, you're a conduit, a pathway of God's grace. So, in all of this, in our ripening fruit, in gentleness, we can glorify God in how we treat others. I think that's great hope for the year 2021, to put on all of these fruits of the Spirit, to put on all of these, this love, this joy, this peace and patience, this gentleness, faithfulness. 365 days in the year 2021. There are 24 hours in 7 days a week. There's 60 seconds in every minute. I give you this list from Paul, the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 through 23. These things that he says there is no law against. May we begin the new year with a new us, a new me, a new you. May the blessings of God continue to flow not just on us, but may we reflect the grace of God to others. Peace, my friends. Peace in the new year. I will see you on Sunday at 10 o'clock. Until then, bye for now.